Alright. Good evening, folks. My name is Phil Gallagher. I run ThrabenU University, a site for legacy, death, and taxes. Today we are not going to be playing any Magic. Instead, I am just going to be discussing the cards from Modern Horizons that have the potential to impact Legacy. I'm going to talk about 29 of these cards, and those are the ones that are listed in categories 2 through 7 here. I am going to gloss over a lot of cards. The reason being that if I have 29 cards and I spend an average of, 2 minutes on them, that's already an hour-long discussion. And there are a couple of these, especially when we get towards the end, where I will spend quite a bit of time talking about them. So I'm looking to keep this entire video, down to 1 or 2 hours and, not make an entire podcast episode, right? So the first thing I want to do is just, talk about Category 1 here, because there's a lot of stuff in this category. Hey, Eric, thank you very much for hosting. So, folks, I'm just going to kind of redo a little bit of the intro here. Good evening, my name is Phil Gallagher. I run ThrabenU University, a site for legacy, death, and taxes. This is going to be my discussion of Modern Horizons and how it's going to impact Legacy. We're going to be talking about 29 cards from this set and ignoring a good number of others. This is a really unique set in that the power level is very clearly and obviously pushed. So what that means for us is that there are sort of more cards than ever that maybe deserve discussion or that I have to skip over. So I've cherry-picked the ones that I want to talk about. And in this category, here's the close but no cigar category that I came up with. And after I looked over the spoilers some more and I started listening to what other people said about the format, I realized that there's a couple more fringe playable things that probably make it into this category or maybe even this category. And if I have some time at the end, I might talk about some of them. Yes, Yawgmoth Thran Physician is one that I looked at that and I saw an unplayable card. And then I heard Eddie mention it in the context of humans, and then I went, well, okay, I can kind of see that. So just a couple notes about this presentation. Number one, I prepared this prior to listening or reading anyone else's content, with the exception of the Eternal Glory podcast. I listened to about 3/4 of that before I got distracted and let the rest of the podcast roll off while I was doing something else. So I listened to that, but I didn't read Max's article until after this. I didn't really listen to the Eternal Durdles or anything else. So some of my opinions on these cards have changed, and I'll talk about that when I get to them. But this was the presentation that I put together yesterday morning. All right, so here we go. First, I just want to talk about Category 1. Everything that's in Category 1, I think, falls into the category of, if I see this hit the play in a Legacy table, I will not be surprised to see anyone talking about it. And if this were a less powerful set, I would 100% talk about many of these cards. But my time is limited here. So just for a quick example, Hogaak, question mark on pronunciation there, Arisen Necropolis is viable in Dredge, potentially. Icefang Coatl is potentially viable in the blue-green mid-range Alurin deck that some people are trying to brew, scale up, maybe can see play and infect. But some of these cards have significant downsides, and because this set is of such a high power level, I'm not going to delve into these. So I just want to throw that out there. Everything that's in this category, again, I won't be surprised if it sees play. But I want to start by talking about the stuff here, and if this stream goes quickly, I might be able to double back to some of this stuff or discuss some of the others that, I left off the list in the "and others" category. All right. So, starting off with Muradin Besieged. I have to do a lot of like resizing here, so I apologize for that as we go through this stream. There's not really like a glorious way to go and do this without like covering up a bunch of my screen, as is very clear here. All right, there we go. Muradin Besieged, not the set, the card. So when it's one of these like modal enchantments. So when it enters the battlefield, you pick one of its modes. You either get a 1/1 colorless mirror artifact creature token when you cast an artifact spell, or at the beginning of your end step, you loot, and if you have 15 or more artifact cards in your graveyard, target opponent loses the game. All right, number one, the Phyrexian side is bad. Like, it's really hard to get 15 artifact cards into your graveyard, even if you are an artifact-heavy deck. Consider something like Bomberman that is going and really cantripping through artifacts quickly with baubles. Even those decks at the end of a long game, are they going to go and have 15 artifacts in the graveyard? And I think the answer to that question is no. So the Phyrexian side should largely be ignored, with the potential upside that once in a blue moon, this should go and win the game. It's actually the Muradin side that's interesting. So why is this interesting? Because blue already has access to Psi Master Thopterus that is a very, very similar effect. And it might be possible to make like a Monastery Mentor Muradin Besieged Psi Master Thopterus sort of like artifact cantrip deck. And the only question I have is that better than anything else that exists? And if this card had been printed a couple of months ago, the answer might have been, yeah, this is actually pretty good. You know, maybe throw it in a shell with the Antiquity Wars and call it a day. Hey, you know what's seen a lot less play in the last 2 months? Or however long War of the Spark's been out? Antiquity Wars. Why? Because we got Karn. We got Karn the Great Creator, and I think that's taking up a lot of the design space from these blue artifact decks. So in the past, they were kind of hurting for like card advantage engines and or win conditions. And Karn's just so good at everything that those decks need to be doing that I don't know that cards like this can fit. But at the same time, I'm totally open to entertaining the idea that this could realistically see play in sort of a revival of like the Psi archetype. Do I think that deck will be good or tier 1 or anywhere close to it? No. But you might be able to make a deck out of it. The next card, though, is much, much more interesting. And I am prepared to be wrong on this one. It's possible that I have underrated this card. Oh my gosh. There we go. So we finally get Ursa as a card, and it's a really interesting one. So when it enters the battlefield, you get a Karnstruct, right? Like, so it enters the battlefield and it immediately Karn minuses. Neat. It Karn minuses that can immediately give you a blue mana. Ooh, that's cool. And it turns all of your other untapped artifacts into Lotus Petals. Well, Lotus Petal's not quite right. It doesn't sacrifice itself into whatever bad artifact goes and taps for one blue mana. Not Sapphire Amulet, Sapphire Medallion. I don't know. It makes a blue mana. And then it has a 5 mana ability that, like, basically is not relevant most of the time unless you're doing something else degenerate with it in the first place. So why does this catch my eye? Well, when you pair this with Thopter Sword, it goes infinite really hard. If you pair this with Thopter Sword, you have infinite life, infinite mana, infinite 1/1s, which means infinite permanents as well. So that becomes really, 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 really hard to beat. Fair Thopter Sword is already hard for a lot of decks to beat. Consider something like Death and Taxes. If you're paired against them and you can make 7 1/1s a turn and make 7 life, can they beat that? No, probably not. If you add this card into the mix, it lets you go over the top of a lot of other decks. So, for example, consider something like Show and Tell. If your opponent has an Emrakul, can you just beat that with Thopter Sword? Ooh, it's questionable, right? Because you lose permanents probably at or equal to the rate at which you can make them up, and this changes that. So you get a Karnstruct at the rate that you're often getting a Karnstruct for, plus another body, plus a little mana. This is a really interesting card. Again, I don't know that this card is going to be competitive because of Karn. Like, if you can play 8 Karns in your deck, do you have room for these cards, like the last two that we've discussed? I don't know that the answer is yes. Max seems to be pretty excited about this card. But at the same time, he's kind of openly admitted that, the cards that you can brew, the decks that you can brew with cards like Ursa and Muradin's Besieged might end up just being bad Bomberman. Yeah, Baruch brings up another good point as well. When you hit infinite mana, you can also actually make use of the bottom ability here as well, and you can go and just draw as much of your deck as you need, and then you hit a kill condition that can win the game that turn, like Walking Ballista. It's Food Chain 2.0. Yeah, that's kind of a good comparison. Yeah, I actually quite like that comparison. So, this is the equivalent of the Food Chain card, where it doesn't necessarily do a ton on its own. It does some on its own, but it can enable other degenerate things. So this is a card that, when I initially put together this list, it caught my eye. I didn't really think it was that great, but, I'm prepared to be wrong on this. Okay, so Ballista's a bad example there. I just closed out my card. Even if you can't Ballista, if you get to draw your deck, you also can probably just find a way to win that turn. All right, let's continue on the path of blue cards that may or may not be invalidated by Karn, because that's the theme of this portion of the stream, and that's Tribute Mage. Ooh, yeah, Staff of Domination is exactly the sort of thing I was thinking of, where you draw it, you win the game. Yeah, that'll do. When you have infinite mana, you find a way. All right, Tribute Mage is the next mage in line. We have Trophy Mage, we have Trinket Mage, now we get Tribute Mage in the middle. I wonder what artifact we could get that had a converted mana cost of exactly 2. I'm completely out of ideas. For anyone not getting the obvious joke here, the Thopter Sword combo is referenced directly on this card. This is the sword portion of that Sword of the Meek. So this card will have other utility other than just going and searching up Thopter Sword, but that's an obvious easy slot in for what this does. So for example, you can use this as Awkward Blue Stoneforge and fetch up Umezawa's Jitte. You can use this to get really good sideboard cards, say Ratchet Bomb or Sorceress Spyglass. You can use this as a value engine to get something that cantrips. Yeah, Baleful Strix is a great example of that. So in some of these blue decks, say Tesserator decks of the past, even just getting something like a Dimir Signet can be a pretty big deal. Yeah, Phyrexian Revoker, Winter Orb, like, there's a lot of good, exactly 2 CMC artifacts that you can go and get up. Again, if an Ursa deck focused around Thopter Sword becomes playable, a main deckable, flexible tutor, that's not the worst thing in the world. You know, there's other tutors, you know, you get Transmute Artifact, you get, what is it, Whir of Invention. So, like, there's other options available, but this is something that can, you know, chump block a Tarmogoyf or something for a little while. Yeah, Captain QC, that's a good point. So, like, consider how good, like, Spell Snare can be at times, and all the stuff that Spell Snare counters, this can go and find, at least on the artifact side. So this is a card that I don't expect to be popular, but I expect to see this card. Also, I'm really glad you guys can't see my left screen. I have so many tabs open. It's like a shameful number of tabs. All right. Next up, we have a card that a lot of people have called, like, absolutely awesome, archetype changing, making Painter tier 1. I don't know about that. But this is a really interesting card. Tab shaming is a bannable offense. Okay, but what if it's the drink tab? Do we shame that? Those are the real questions. All right, so this is Goblin Engineer. So you get to entomb an artifact. And then you can use this to sacrifice an artifact to return an artifact with CMC 3 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield. So, what's going on with this? You can't use this to just go and turbo out something like Spine of Isha or Mere Battlesphere. Like, you can only return the small stuff, but you can get anything. So there's kind of 2 ways I see this going. Number 1 is slotting this in for Painter. In Painter, what CMCs do you care about? 3 or less. Painter Servant, Grindstone, and most of your, like, utility artifacts are 3 or less. And this can do some really interesting things to your main deck slots. So, for example, you can play... this is a straightforward example, but you can play Trinosphere, for example, and just use this as a Trinosphere tutor. Maybe powering this out on turn 1, Trinosphere out on turn 2. And only play, like, 1 copy of a Trinosphere. Now, Painter specifically, like, will play multiple copies of Trinosphere in all likelihood, but, like, that's an example of the sort of thing you can do. And you can go, like, really deep with this card with some sort of, like, artifact toolbox if you want. The other thing I was thinking about with this card is that you could try some sort of, like, mono-red artifact reanimator deck. One of my locals, who now works for SCG, for a while tried a mono-red artifact reanimator deck with, like, Duretti, Felden of the Third Path, I think it was, like, Worm Coil Engines, a bunch of lock pieces, a couple other artifact finishers. I don't remember exactly what it was, but it was, like, Steel Hellkites and things of that nature. And something like that could use a card like this. You know, that's real fringe Legacy territory, but, like, this card in Painter is going to be real. Like, imagine this world. You're a Painter player. You can play up to 4 Goblin Engineers to tutor stuff into your graveyard, alongside 4 Goblin Welders if you want, alongside 4 Karns if you want, and like put pieces of that, like put one piece of the painter combo each in exile in your sideboard. Have the ability to tutor them up in your graveyard, and then also have Imperial Recruiter to tutor for this, or a piece of your combo, or your finisher in Walking Ballista. For a non-blue deck, you can probably make something that is incredibly redundant and hard to attack from enough angles that you can go and shut off everything while progressing your own game plan. So, like, I don't know that Painter has the room to make this work alongside Karns while also keeping a good Imperial Recruiter toolbox. But this is definitely, I think, probably going to at least be a one-of in Painter, if not more. I haven't played enough Painter to like make more authoritative statements beyond that. Oh, and somebody followed a while back. Zorla, thank you very much for following, as well as Green Sun 1. Thank you. Hope you're enjoying this. Buckle up. We're only like 4 cards in. Ash Moses, a lot of times Painter does have some mana rocks. You know, at the very least, some Lotus Petals or something like that. So yeah, that's accurate. All right. So I've labeled this category sort of like the questionable one, and here's a real questionable card. Please, I beg you, just get smaller. No. Yeah. All right. Martyr's Soul. So, when I first looked at this card, I immediately dismissed this, and I thought it was unplayable. And then I looked at the card again, and I thought, yeah, I still think it's bad. And then I looked at Enevoldson's status, and he thought it was interesting. And I'm like, I don't know. I don't know. And then I thought about it. And I decided, all right, in what world is this card good? Am I missing something? And after thinking about the card, it does some interesting things. So, plus sides of this card. You can Violet in. It's a 5/4. Neat. Other plus sides of this card. You can use this... How do I say this? In situations where the board is stalled, and neither of you can attack anyway, you can go and use this as a way to get some tempo back. So you can essentially use this to go and say, like, all right, we both have a bunch of X1s. Now I have the biggest creature. I have something that can go and attack him. So on your like non-vile hands, for example, you can use this to like cheat an extra creature out for free. The next question is, does that matter? And is that worth the downside of this being a 3/2 for 3 mana from time to time? And I think the answer is no. I don't think we need big dumb beaters in D&T. For our dumb beaters, we have Serra Avenger and Mirren Crusader, and those are still cards with incredible utility, right? Serra Avenger has flying and vigilance, meaning that it is a defensive and offensive card that gets through in the air. Mirren Crusader has hate against 2 awesome colors while also being a double striker. Would I give up either one of those slots to play something that has a bigger body but has a downside and may also to cause me to like tap some of my creatures at a vital time in order to make this better? And I think the answer is no, I don't want to do that. So I think this card is better than I thought it was when I first looked at it and immediately dismissed it as absolutely unplayable. But I still think this falls into like the category of this is not going to make the cut in any D&T deck long term. You know, and would it see play outside of D&T? No, I don't really think so. I don't think there's any deck that's like, I would like to tap 3 of my creatures to make a 5/4. I just don't think we're there. I will eat my hat if this is good in D&T, says Bahra. Yeah. I think you're making a safe bet. Can confirm Maverick does not want this either. Hey, do I tap my creatures to make a 10/10? Hey, if we're getting into 10/10 territory, it's an entirely different thing, right? Alright. So the next card is one that I already talked about a little bit on my Goblin stream with Goblin Lackey the other day. So I'll just reiterate some of what we said there. And that's Pechaluk Mons. Too many taps. Yeah. So when I first looked at this card, I dismissed this. I did not think this was good enough. And then Goblin Lackey kind of talked me through it, and I started to change my mind. So whenever this or another goblin you control dies, this does 1 damage to any target. It's kind of like a sharpshooter ability when you go and pair this with, say a sacrifice outlet. Say Sling Gang Lieutenant, for example, which we'll talk about a little bit later. And then it also has this other ability of, like, pay 4 mana, sacrifice a goblin, get 2 goblins. So this second ability is slow, but has its uses. It's this first ability that you're really interested in. So, number 1, this is 1 damage to any target, not 1 damage to any creature. So, for example, you can use this to go and ping some planeswalkers. You can, target a player directly. So, like, this could be reach for goblins. The dream with Pechaluk will involve 2 Mog War Marshals, a Skirk Prospector, 6 damage, 6 mana. Yeah, that's the thing about this card. This is a card that on its own I don't think is impressive. Like, if the board's empty and you top deck this, I don't really think it's good. But when you have this on a decently complicated board, all of a sudden everything gets real spooky. Like, if you have this and a sacrifice outlet, like, the things that you can do are absolutely disgusting, and it's going to make combat math an absolute nightmare. Yeah, that's a good point. So Artano there says that, like, this is a legendary creature, so, like, can you count on this sticking around for some of these fair matches? And that's a good point, but let me make a counterpoint. This first half of the card is the card that you care about, and this does not get, like, Pithing Needled, Revokered, or Spyblast. So, like, you are taking a trade-off there. You're also a Vile deck, so, like, the whole, like, Karaka's legendary thing is a weird, awkward dance there. When I was talking with Goblin Lackey, we both kind of agreed that, like, this card is either going to do nothing or it's going to do insane things. So this is one of those, like, high ceiling, high floor cards most of the time. And, like, the question I have is, how much of the time is it going to reach the ceiling versus how much of the time is it going to be a 2/2 that maybe does a point of damage or 2? So this is a card I have my eye on. I don't know that I'm ready to say that it's good, but it's very interesting. Here's a card that I'm ready to say that it's good. But there might be a problem with it, and we'll get to that in a second. Stop trying to do that. I don't want you to do that. Just leave it where I drag it. Okay. Cloud Shredder Sliver. This card is objectively insane. On a 2-mana Sliver, you are getting 2 incredibly powerful effects. Flying and haste. This is a better rate as far as abilities go than basically every other Sliver that the deck is playing in like the 1 or 2 drop slot right now. So why am I not losing my absolute mind over this card? Well, here's the thing. Slivers already has creatures that grant flying. And how much do they cost? 1. So, do we want to play something that gives us a much better effect at a higher converted mana cost, at the cost of potentially removing one of our better 1-drops? And that's a real question. What happens if we remove our nice, like, blue 1-drop Slivers that grant flying? Force of Will in Slivers becomes much, much worse if you do that. Now, Slivers is already a 5-color deck most of the time. So, like, being in awful colors is not a real argument for that deck. Like, the mana base is stellar. It is, like, the best 5-color mana base in Legacy. It's, like, it's better than Humans, for example. Because, like, you get Sliver Hive as well. But it not playing well with the 1-drops that you already have access to that are very good, and it not pitching to Force of Will, those are big game. Sure, it's a deck with a 5-color mana base that's mostly in 3 colors, so it's mostly a 5-color deck still. And a lot of the flex slot Slivers and sideboard Slivers end up being in the other colors, especially black. So I think this card is amazing. Like, the ability is right, the rate is superb. Will it fit in with the way that the deck is constructed? I don't know. Like, this is a very, very scary card, but I'm just not sure that it works. I will tell you that I want to play some Slivers with this card, and maybe a couple of the Slivers that I left up here. But this card is genuinely exciting. So let's go from genuinely exciting to, like, kind of mediocre, but I should probably still, like, give a nod to this card because it's, like, still quite powerful. Yeah, so, like, historically, the 2-drop slot in Sliver is the equivalent of the 3-drop slot in Legacy. Or, sorry, in, like, Legacy D&T. Where, like, when you're playing Slivers, you really want to leave your vial on 2 unless you have a great reason to tick it up. Because, like, most of your best cards are at 2. Alright. So, on Thin Ice. This is, like, the next in the line of the conditional white 1-mana removal spells that get rid of something. So, like, obviously, this is not good enough to be a Swords to Plowshares replacement. So the question you ask, like, is this good enough to be a replacement for, say, Path to Exile in some decks? Let's take D&T as an obvious deck that, like, wants to run additional 1-mana white removal spells. If you play this, you have to run Snowlands. Not that big of a deal. You'll probably have somewhere on the order of 12 Snowlands. Do you want to play a 1-mana removal spell that you would like to play early in the game do you want to play this when it also requires you to draw one of 12 other cards in your deck to be good? And I think the answer to that is no. So imagine you keep an opener that's like Caracas on Thin Ice, Aether Vial, Waste, Port, Stoneforge, Flickerwisp, or something like that. Like, you can't cast this card and use it as a removal spell to help you, like, bridge to the mid-game. And I think that's a really, really big deal. Now, will there be other decks that play this? I think that is possible. Yeah, so that was actually one of the things that I wanted to talk about, Immortal Role. So there are some fringe scenarios where this card ends up being noticeably better than, like, Path or Swords, and that's like a show and tell type effect. So, like, you can go and dump this in, and then, like, all of a sudden, huzzah, I've gone and I've exiled your Emrakul or your Grizzlebrand or something like that. So, like, there are these fringe scenarios where this card can be really good, but I think in order to make this card work, you need to be playing a lot of Snowlands. You need to be willing to not play this in the first couple of turns. So, like, you'd need to be a deck with maybe more planes than D&T and a bad show and tell matchup in order to want to do this. So, like, I don't know. Soldier Stompy maybe wouldn't want this. They're a Chalice deck, but, like, there's worlds where this could be playable. But I think this is, like, maybe a card that should have been in this category. But, like, as a D&T person, and people are always asking me questions about sideboard cards for D&T, I felt the need to talk about it. All right. So now we're, if only it had Flash. It's the perfect 1-mana white removal spell. If it had Flash, I don't know. I'd think about it a little harder. So that's kind of the end of my, like, this is questionable category. And, like, cards from here on out are probably going to be playable. The next category, it's kind of fringe, but I expect to see some number of these cards in play in tournaments, especially for the first couple of weeks after the set is released, while people figure out whether or not they're good. Unrelated, Omniscience sucks. True. Also unrelated, I'm going to play some Omniscience tomorrow morning after breakfast. Okay, maybe that is related. All right, so we're going to talk about the 3 lands cards right in a row, because that's essentially what the next part of this category is. And kind of the reason why I'm putting all 3 of these cards in this category is because I think they're going to fight with each other for room in the deck. I don't think there's room for all of them, and I haven't played enough of those decks to know which one of these cards is the best. No, unfortunately, I'm playing, like, some standard Omniscience Emrakul deck. Not a fun Omniscience deck. Alright, so Tectonic Reformation. You give the lands in your hand cycling for a single red. This is cool. I will cast Life from the Loam. I will return 3 lands. I will use 1 red mana, dredge my Life from the Loam. Or I will go and cycle some of these lands, like make my land drop, draw 2 actual cards from my deck, the next turn dredge Life from the Loam, and have the option again. So this is a card that does very little on its own, but once you pair this with Loam, the flexibility you have is absolutely absurd. The reason why being that when you get to the mid/end game of lands, and your opponent isn't like locked out yet, or you're not like very clearly ahead, sometimes you have to make a tough choice between, do I want to commit to loaming, or do I want to draw a card? If I draw a card and I hit a mana bond or an exploration, I get to pull so far ahead in this game that I probably can't lose. Well, Tectonic Reformation gives you a lot of flexibility in that. You can still dredge your loam, looking for the card you're looking for, while taking some draws to go and get you closer to, like, Mana Bond or Mox Diamond to push you further ahead on mana. So this card can do some really, really interesting things. I think this card is good. Like, I think this card deserves to be in a higher up category, and I would probably put it there if it wasn't also going to like fight with these next two cards. Could this replace the Sylvan Library in lands? Yeah, I think that's totally reasonable. What I'd do is I'd wait about 2 weeks, and then I'd scroll through Jarvis U's like Twitter feed and see what list he posted, and then you'll know whether or not it replaces Sylvan Library. That's what I think is correct to do. You know, I am a lands noob. I've played the deck a little bit, but I don't know all the nuances and such. That's the correct advice. Play what Jarvis does. Yeah, that sounds about right. He knows his stuff. Yeah, Goblin Lackey puts out some great content. Really looking forward to checking out some of his stuff with Black Goblins, or like Red-Black Goblins once the new stuff hits. All right, so our next land-centric card is like Bear Seismic Assault. Ayula's Influence. So, you junk a land card to make a bear. When I first saw this card, I thought, why would I want this? If Seismic Assault just seems better, or like Molten Vortex, because it has the flexibility of going and hitting creatures, and that's a big deal. And then I thought about it in a different way. Cast Life from the Loam, create 6 power worth of bears. Do that every turn for the rest of the game. And then I went, you know, that sounds pretty okay. I don't know that this card is actually good. Like, green, green, green is a little bit of an ask. Like, the deck has, like, maybe Wastelands, sometimes Ancient Tomb, Thespian Stage, so, like, it's not a guaranteed thing. But this is a card that can build an army. So, like, this is something kind of new. So it's hard to evaluate. I think Tectonic Reformation is better than this card. So I don't know that this is like a both and sort of situation. It's probably like an either or situation. Like how many random enchantments can you go and throw into lands without like taking apart your core engine too much? I don't know the answer to that. That's a hypothetical. So like the next thing I was wondering, like, is there some other shell that's playing Life from the Loam that might want this card? And I started thinking about it, and I think the answer is no, because I think green, green, green is just like too hard on that. So what about like Punishing Loam? What about like 4-color Loam? Well, think about the mana base of that deck. Like, green, green, green is kind of questionable when you have like Wastelands and like Badlands. So I don't think that's playable there. like for mana-based reasons, even outside of just like, would I even want this card? And I think the answer is no, right? Like, if you've got a Loam endgame, you're probably doing fine just like recurring wastelands and other utility lands out of your graveyard. So I don't know that this would be needed somewhere like that. The last one is one that I initially thought was bad, and then I started thinking about it, and I changed my mind. Throes of Chaos. What does it do? It cascades. That's it. It does one job. It cascades. And then you retrace it by discarding a land, and it cascades again. So I think this card has two uses. Number one is in lands, it becomes a tutor for a bunch. Tutor's not the right word. It becomes like a pseudo tutor for a bunch of the cards that you really care about. So when lands is doing its thing and reaches the mid to end game, like you have a bunch of mana, like you're often using it to like port and recast Loam and maybe make a Merit Lodge, maybe manually tick down a Dark Depths. You can go, thank you, Bahra, that's a great way to put it. It's a value engine for your high impact cards. So you can go and cast this, and other than hitting Mox Diamond, which is probably bad, you can hit, Mana Bond, Gamble, Life from the Loam, Crop Rotation. You can hit a lot of really high impact cards that matter. And like you can just turn any land into a spell from your deck. So sort of similarly to what I was liking about Tectonic Reformation, this is a card that can go and allow you to get things from your deck while continuing the like Life from the Loam and Dredging plan. And I think that that's really cool. The other thing I thought about this card was like, we have another Cascade enabler. Is there any deck that maybe doesn't have manipulation and would really like to cascade and doesn't need a bunch of lands endgame? And my next thought was Jund. Would a Jund deck be comfortable playing this as a one-of? I don't see why not, right? Like, they already really like the idea of cascading. They already have a bunch of great value-oriented cards to cascade into, but what does that deck get endgame with its extra mana? The answer is often nothing, because Jund's often the sort of deck where unless you have a live Bob, you're just going hellbent at the end of the game, oftentimes because like you're forcing yourself that direction with your own Liliana. So this is a card that gets you more effective copies of some of your cards that matter, although it's random which ones you get, and it heads against flooding endgame. So this is something that like very easily could be a Jund one-of. And I think that's really neat. Alright. So let's talk about the sword that people are excited about. Sword of Sinew and Steel. Why trade Bloodbraid Elf for this card? No. You don't trade Bloodbraid Elf for any card. That card is like the linchpin card of Jund. You will continue to play 4 of those. You would treat this as a 5th Bloodbraid Elf. That is just like largely worse than Bloodbraid Elf, but has its own spot. Like, sorry, maybe I didn't make that distinction clear. All right, Sword of Sinew and Steel. I forgot to look up what Reddit user this is, but some Reddit user called this sword Sword of Shark Blast on Red Prison, and I lost my mind when I read that, because it's so true. If you want to play a sideboard hate sword that will ruin a matchup, my god, that goes and does it. So against Red Prison, this repeatedly destroys artifacts and nugs their planeswalkers as well. Yeah, Goblin Pile Driver on Reddit. That sounds right. Thank you. Yeah, I lost my mind. I laughed so hard. I was like out in public too, so it was embarrassing. All right. So more generally, is this card good outside of that matchup? Probably not. This is a really narrow card. To make a comparison, Manriki Gusari is another very narrow but very good piece of equipment that's tutorable by Stoneforge Mystic. How much play does that see? Almost none, because it's really only for 1 or 2 matches. It's really for Stoneblade and the Death and Taxes matchup. So, are you going to play this card, which is really insanely, awesomely good against Red Prison, and then decisively mediocre elsewhere? And I think the answer to that question most of the time is going to be no. This will be an awesome sideboard card for your local metagames. And I fully, honestly, truly believe that. If you have a local metagame where people are playing a bunch of Red Prison, a bunch of like Baleful Strix decks or something like that, you will have some utility for having this in your deck. But would you want to board this versus Miracles? The protection's irrelevant. The artifact destruction is irrelevant. Destroying a planeswalker, well, most of the time their planeswalkers are at low enough loyalty where if you get a crack in with a creature, you could probably just kill it anyway. So I don't know that this is going to be good enough. Yeah, and let's imagine the Grixis control scenario. Is this that threatening versus Grixis control? It shuts off a lot of their removal. That's really cool. It lets you get through Baleful Strix. That's really cool. If it connects, you get rid of a Planeswalker. That was probably already true in the first place, but I guess that's neat. This is not a powerful enough sword in the Grixis control matchup, I think, to really make it worth your time. Most of the time in that matchup, you'd want to be tutoring up Sword of Fire and Ice first anyway, and your equipment's not even overly reliable in the first place. So, if you have this in your sideboard, you'll bring it in. You'll play it for Grixis. You'll play it in Red Prison. You could, I guess, bring it in the Death and Taxes mirror because there's these worlds where you actually get to connect with your irrelevant protection sword and get there, and you can say, oh, but the Batterskull token on the Jerd is black, so the protection is actually relevant in the matchup, and I'll smile and say yes, that is technically true, but I don't see this card doing a lot. So let's talk about ceiling versus floor on this sword. Ceiling is you draw this versus Red Prison, and you attack, obliterate Chandra, destroy a bridge or something. Or against Grixis control, you attack, hit them for 4 or 5 damage, destroy a Planeswalker, destroy a Baleful Strix. Those are the highest upside scenarios. But I think the downside is this takes up a sideboard slot that could be something else. So I think this card will see play, but I think it's more of a local metagame card or a, my god, I really don't want to lose to this deck this weekend card than it is just an objectively powerful and good sword. And just to start saying this now, whenever you evaluate a sword, you should not compare it to Sword of Fire and Ice, which is clearly the best sword, will probably be the best sword ever printed. You should compare it to the second best sword. You should go and compare it to the other things that are fighting for your supplementary equipment slots. So, like, if you want to evaluate this, compare it to Manriki Usari, compare it to Sword of War and Peace and things of that nature, rather than Sword of Fire and Ice. Yeah, and as always, there's always, like, the Mirren Crusader dreams of, like, I'm going to attack you for 8, destroy 2 of your planeswalkers, obliterate 2 of your artifacts. But, like, hasn't the Red Prison player already conceded by that point? Sword of Truth and Justice is over here in the good cards category. Although I'm, like, the only person on the internet who's, like, fucking hyped for that card. I'm gonna have to defend myself on that one. But we'll get to that when we get to the good cards. Alright. This is a hard to evaluate card. I think it's bad. But it's interesting bad. So I want to talk about it. So what does this card do? So this is obviously the sort of thing that can slot into Death and Taxes. When people look at this, I think they think this enters the battlefield and finds a mom. I think that's the wrong way to look at this. I think the way to look at this is this enters the battlefield and finds a walking ballista. That's a way cooler way of looking at this card. So, like, let's stick with the first ability. As an ability, the top side of this card is just worse than Recruiter of the Guard. Like, Recruiter of the Guard can find all the 1-drops that you're playing. Like, it can find Mom, it can find Ballista. So, it's worse in that regard, but it comes attached with a much more reasonable body. A body that survives common hate cards. You know, like, say, Dread of Night, that the Recruiter is susceptible to. And this is something that you can play and gum up the board for, say, annoying red creatures that cost 2 mana and are, like, as good as Jace the Mind Sculptor. You know, for example, to pick something, you know, completely random that is plaguing the format and scares the bejesus out of me. So, like, it being a 3/3 is pretty big game. I think the bottom ability of this card is questionable. I think it's really easy to think of the highest upside plays for that. Like, your opponent reveals Terminus, you sacrifice it in response, they don't get to Miracle their Terminus. Or, like, you're playing against Ad Nauseam and your opponent goes, like, Dark Ritual, Cabal Ritual, and you're like, that's enough. Like, stop it. I think those scenarios are really easy to imagine. But I think a lot of times the bottom ability is, like, you throwing away a card for safety that you may or may not need. So I think a lot of times when you're playing Death and Taxes, like, you try to establish a read on what your opponent has over the course of the game. And so this card feels like training wheels to me. Like, do I need to play around a removal spell this turn? I don't know. Like, sack this, equip my Jitte, I'll get in there. And I don't know that, like, this card does anything that's necessary in the archetype. I don't really think this does anything new. Like, we have Sanctum Prelate that we can, like, use to go and stop a Terminus. We have Recruiter of the Guard as a tutor engine, an inevitability engine with Flicker Wisp. So, like, this card isn't tutorable by Recruiter, so would we really want to, like, go and play this as a singleton? I don't know that the answer is yes. So, like, this card has plenty of things going for it. It's interesting. You can accrue value with it with Flicker Wisp. Is this what the deck needs? Like, I'd definitely be willing to try this out in a flex slot, but I'm not overly impressed by this card. I think I'm less excited than a lot of people about this one. Like, I 100% be willing to, like, eat crow and go, like, this one's wrong. Compare it to Judge's Familiar. It's a counterspell on a body that also tutors. It stops Storm mid-combo. Yeah, sure. But a Sanctum Prelate on 1, 2, or 4 would just stop them from comboing in the first place. You can also get bitten in the butt by, like, picking a wrong moment to, like, try and stop Storm. Like, how many spells do you let them cast before you go and do this? It's a weird sub game. So, like, there's no flying, there's no vigilance, there's no double strike, no protection here. So I don't know that, like, the utility that this card is giving is going to, like, make it good enough that I'm willing to take one of the, like, beaters out of the deck. And I don't know that it's good enough that I want to take one of my utility cards out of the deck. So I think this ends up in this weird middle area where it does a little bit of everything, but some of the things that you're doing aren't just powerful enough to make its flexibility better than the objective strength of one of your other cards. So that's kind of my feeling on that one. It's complicated. At the same time, that's a card that I definitely playtest to see how it functions in games. Alright, Giver of Runes. This is bad mom. End discussion. Not really, because I talk a lot. But one of the biggest upsides of Mom that people don't realize is that you can play Mom out and have it not be good for a little while, and that's fine. Like, Mom can sit there and protect herself, and at some point, like, you're probably getting a 2-for-1 out of it in order for Mom to be removed. That's not true with Giver of Runes. Your opponent can just, like, wait, target Giver of Runes, destroy it, target the other thing, destroy it, and you haven't actually gained anything out of it. So this is not really something that's going to go and get you card advantage, and that's a big deal. I think the best way to illustrate this is as follows. You're playing against Miracles. You play Giver of Runes. Will your opponent remove that card? No. Absolutely not. There's no reason to. You're playing against Grixis Control. You play this card. Does your opponent need to remove it? No. Absolutely not. Oh. Those decks are so threatened by a quick Mother of Runes into Thalia or something like that in a way that's not true with Giver of Runes. So this is not something that is going to go and replace Mother of Runes at all. It's just a worse Mom. The upside that this can protect from colorless is not worth the downside. This is something that you'll only play if you want more Moms. It's been a few years, but something like 3 years ago, Finn and I had a discussion where it was like, how many Moms would we play if we could? And we, at the time, prior to, like, Recruiter and Prelate and some of our other, like, big recent gets for the deck being printed, we were like, yeah, we'd play, like, 8 Moms. The card's so good. But now that, like, we have the option to play more Moms, the average card quality in Death and Taxes has gone up so much that this is really questionable. Like, yes, we would love more 1-drop plays, but whether or not this is actually good enough, it's probably not. Is the 2 toughness relevant? Yes, sure, it's relevant. It lives through Dread of Night. It lives through Electrickery. You know, there's times where that's relevant, but, like, is this card getting into the red zone? Is this card, like, realistically blocking anything other than a 1/1? No, not really. Yeah, it's a modern legal Mom that is very obviously not a human for modern reasons. Like, this card will be great in Modern, I'm pretty sure of that. But by Legacy standards, it's rough. Hose is Goblin Lackey, so it's broken. Absolutely. Yeah, here's the thing about the Eldrazi matchup, though. Do you want to keep more 1-drops in your deck for that matchup when, like, Chalice of the Void is already something that they very actively want to go and put on 1? And this is, like, not a human, so even if you're playing Cavern of Souls, you're not going to, like, force it through with Cavern on human. Like, it would be fine in the Eldrazi matchup if you get it into play against, like, non-Thought-Knot Seer, non-Ballista threats. Like, it's pretty grand. But pretty medium on this. Note that, like, most of the D&T cards from this set fall into that category. I don't know, man. Remember the last 1-mana 1/2 with abilities? Got banned. That's a good point. We'll keep that in mind. All right. I guess I need to, like, start doing this backwards now because I need to keep this column revealed. All right. I doubt I'd ever want that card in play versus Eldrazi over something else, anything else. If Giver of Runes had 2 more abilities, it would be great. Accurate. All right. So, Force of Vigor. This is the green force. It is kind of medium as a whole, but situationally stupid good. So, like, first, let's talk about the unfair, and then we'll talk about the fair uses of this. Force of what? Did you just kill me? Yes, that is a great way to put it, Tight Pants. That's the second use of it that I'm going to talk about. All right. So first is the unfair use of this card. This is something that's good at fighting the hate against unfair decks. So if your opponent goes and leads on Blood Moon, Trinisphere, a Leyline that you're really going to have trouble beating, Force of Vigor is a card that can answer those sorts of cards without costing you mana. This is very relevant if, say, Blood Moon just wrecks you. Oh, I can't cast any of my cards, but I can pitch a card to cast this. And it's very relevant that it can hit multiple hate cards. So, like, let's consider the Manaless Dredge perspective. Your opponent is a real jerkwad, and they, like, have a black Leyline and a Grafdigger's Cage. And then you pitch a card, and you're like, you're not safe anymore. It's playtime now. Yeah, so, like, Trinisphere is a bad example of that. But, you know, what I meant by that is, like, you can hit hate cards that really ruin you without paying mana. So, like, an early Chalice that would absolutely devastate you, this can answer, and you can just move on. And it does so without costing you any tempo. It just costs you a card. I like your voice acting for a Manaless Dredge player. Yeah, so that's the thing, right? This is for decks that are playing green. So you can't just go and slot this into, say, Reanimator. You can slot this into something like Dredge, where, like, oh, I've got a bunch of Golgari Grave Trolls that I can go and throw away if things go wrong. Like, you can make it work in those sorts of decks. But it's not like you can just put this into any unfair deck, you know? Reanimator will still have things like if you control a forest card, make them gain 6 life, destroy all enchantments. Nature something. I'm just blanking on the name of it. So, like, that's the unfair side of this, where you get to fight back against, like, the unfair hate cards that your opponent is playing. The fair side of this is just using this as a mid-game card versus Death. Reverent Silence is what I was thinking of. Thank you. Sorry. Thank you, Loverboy. So, sorry, let me finish my train of thought there. The second thing this does is you get to use it as a mid-game card versus decks like Red Prison and Death and Taxes that just happen to have a lot of artifacts. Or similarly for decks that have enchantments. So, like, imagine this scenario. Like, you're playing Maverick versus D&T. Like, you go to combat, you declare attacks, your opponent blocks in with some creature that has equipment, and then you go and, like, all right, Force of Vigor, destroy your equipment, destroy your Ether Vial. Like, my god. Like, the things that you can do with this are amazing. So it doesn't actually break the lattice lock, because the lattice, it makes everything colorless, so you can't actually end up pitching a green card to it. So that's an easy miss. It looked like the perfect answer to that whole Karn lattice shenanigans, but no, that still gets to run rampant. So, as a mid-game card, at 4 mana, destroying 2 artifacts or enchantments is playable. Now, that sort of effect doesn't see play very much, but this has the added flexibility of being able to do it for free, and that is huge. Like, there's so many times when you're playing a mid-range deck where you have more cards than you can actively deploy. Force of Vigor, pitch my Bird of Paradise, take out your 2 best cards, then play my Knight. This is a big deal. This is a very, very powerful card. Yeah, so like there's Return to Dust, which does something similar. Otherwise, like there's multiple artifact destroy cards, like from Scars of Muradin, there was one. But this is like flexible and has the ability to be cast for free. Also, keep in mind that many of the decks that might want to play this are also like Gaia's Cradle decks or like Mana Dork decks anyway. So 4 cost for destroy 2 artifacts or enchantments mid-game is totally fine. Yeah, Slice and Twain was what I was thinking of. Creeping Corrosion is another, wreck all artifact card. So this is something that I very specifically think will see some degree of play in Maverick, although they also get the next toy that we'll talk about. And there's probably other places where this will get slotted into as well outside of Manaless Dredge. Is it better than Krosan Grip? It's just different. Yeah. So like you play Krosan Grip because you want it to be uncounterable. You play this one because you want to be able to surprise someone, or you want to be able to go and like get this for free in the early game. All right, Nature's Chant, there's not a lot to say here. This is essentially a better disenchant for decks that are playing both green and white basics. So like in Maverick, for example, you might have Wasteland and Forest, or Wasteland and Plains. This is something that, like, on any combination of colorless land and 1 basic, you'll be able to cast this. Not that, like, the deck would have trouble casting Disenchant in the first place, but, like, there are times where you need to lead on that basic forest for one reason or another, and this gives you that nice, like, safety and flexibility. It's also nice because if your opponent like Blood Moons you and you lose access to 1 of your colors, but you still have 1 of them, either way, you can still go and cast this card. So, like, this isn't sexy. It's not, like, new and exciting in any capacity, but it's a very slight upgrade. All right. Next, we get the card that many Redditors were going and calling for a ban before even playing with the card or even thinking about it all that much. Oh my gosh, did they just give us the Time Twister? Legacy's broken. Buy out LED now. It's gonna be good. It's not gonna be that good. Like, don't worry, people. The sky is not falling. Like, we're living in a chalice apocalypse right now. So, like, Storm's bad in the first place. So, like, this isn't gonna, like, push it out. Okay, so thing number 1 to understand about this card. This card is only good if it is in your graveyard, and even then it's only kind of medium. This is a 6 mana card. So if you just have a bunch of rituals in this card, that's not amazing. And if you have things like, say, Cabal Ritual or Rite of Flame that are like powering themselves based on the graveyard, like, you're losing your graveyard resource when you go and cast this card. That matters. What a world we live in. What is effectively a Power 9 isn't even that good anymore. Well, here's the thing, though. This is situational Power 9. If you have LED, this is Power 9. Like, it is very, very powerful when you have LED. But what about all the times you don't? This is essentially an A plus B combo card that also requires more. You need LED and this, and then the 7 cards that you get afterwards have to be relatively decent, and your opponent also needs to not have drawn into a Force of Will or Force of Negation or Flusterstorm or Mindbreak Trap or anything else relevant like, say, Surgical Extraction to go in and muck with you afterwards. So this is something that we'll see play. I think it slots into Tess. I do think that Tess might need to muck around with Faithless Looting in order to make this card more playable. And I think Faithless Looting is totally reasonable in that shell, by the way. So, like, you need more than just 4 cards to enable this, I think. But I think it's possible that this will see play elsewhere. So someone in chat suggested, like, hey, would you play this in LED Dredge? Where, like, you go LED, discard your hand, crack for blue, flashback, like, I will dredge 7 times. Well, here's the thing about that. Like, the first time you do that, you go and, like, shuffle your graveyard into your library. So, where'd your dredgers go? Don't think so. So, like, let's strike that one. One of the things I was thinking about was, like, could you build a hybrid Reanimator Storm deck? Sort of along the lines of Tin Fins that used this, where you can entomb for this card, or you can just entomb for Grizzlebrand and herpa-derpa-derpa-derp do Grizzlebrand things. I don't know that the answer to that question is yes, but that's one of the places where my mind went. So someone else in chat is asking, like, would you use this in a blue deck to, like, refuel in the mid-game? No, because this isn't, like, you want to refuel, you don't want to refuel your opponent. So, like, what was suggested in chat was something like Grixis Control. This refuels both of you. It's each player, so, like, this is not a control card. Like, if you're doing this, it needs to be degenerate. That's where I'm going to stop talking about this card. If you are interested in some of the math behind this card and, like, what this card is realistically going to do, you should read Bryant Cook's article. Okay, yeah, I should talk about that. The other thing that you could use to abuse this is Narset. So Narset Parter Avails. You don't let your opponent draw cards. You use this as a draw 7 when they don't draw 7. Like, neat. But do you want to do that when it requires you to get a Planeswalker? It requires you to either, like, have LED or 6 mana in the first place? Like, I don't understand why that's good. Like, if you want to do that, you already have Days Undoing, and, like, Days Undoing is already, like, super questionable by Legacy standards, so I don't know about that. But Days Undoing ends your turn. Yeah, okay, that's fair. But if you do this, like, say you pay 6 mana for it, your turn's basically over anyway, right? Like, if you LED flashback this back, like, what do you have, 3 or 4 lands, 3 or 4 mana? Like, and you're a blue deck, can't you make use of that mana on your opponent's turn? Like, I don't know. So, I think this card is playable. Like, I've put it into the good category, and by that I mean, like, this has real legacy power, but it's situational. So, expect to see this card. I don't think it's broken by any means. Alright, now we get to Rhinos. I definitely thought this card was called Crashing Rhinos for, like, a week. Because I didn't read the card, I just looked at the picture. And apparently I just made that mental connection. I had to fix it in my spreadsheet. Alright. So, this card has some downsides. And it has some upsides. The upside is, For a single mana, you get 8 power, eventually. Or, off a Cascade trigger... Alright, sorry, I forgot to move this over here. It's okay. The only thing it says on the other side of the page is Cascade. Rhinos, please. Alright. So, as a 1 mana investment, 1 mana for 8 power is nuts. As a Shardless Agent target, Shardless Agent into Tarmogoyf feels good. This is almost Shardless Agent into 2 Tarmogoyfs. Almost. Like, not quite, but almost. Here's the downside of this card. If you suspend this on turn 1, when do you get to attack with the Rhinos? Turn 6 is the answer to that question. And now this card sounds a lot worse, doesn't it? Usually with Cascade, like, your stuff gets haste, right? But, like, these Rhinos don't have haste. So they're just hanging out. So they're, like, crashing, but it's more like party crashing in that, like, they're there to hang out for a little while before they bugger off. So them not having haste after, like, all that time is kind of a big deal. So as a suspend card, though the, like, mana per power and toughness rate is, like, absolutely insane by Legacy standards, the lack of haste here is maybe a deal breaker. You know, against a combo deck, like, is it okay to not attack until turn 6? Like, it's cool that, like, you can just tap this on 1 and then, like, hold up counterspells forever, but is that good enough? And are you going to have counterspells in your deck anyway if you're playing this? Probably not, other than Force. As a Cascade target, this is pretty hot, though. So this falls into the category of cards that I think are good. Like, the rate is great here. Will this make Shardless Agent work again? I don't know. Like, Shardless Agent has had a lot of competition in the past few years to other value-oriented cards. Culligan's Command being one of the biggest offenders, and then also, like, some of the 3-mana Planeswalkers that we've seen. So, whether or not Shardless can come back because of this, I don't know. You know, if people are playing a bunch of red removal, and they're trying to get there with Dreadhorde Arcanist, like, this blocks that and gives you a second body without, you know, requiring a bunch of mana. This has its uses. Sure, if you want to, like, talk Modern, you know, Bloodbraid into this, it's probably a lot of value by Modern standards. But I don't play enough or any Modern to, like, actually give you an informed opinion there. So I have my eye on this card. I would love to stream with this card. It looks fun. Is it good? Questionable. But it's good enough that I've put it in this category. This is not a Modern stream. We have streamed Modern once on this channel with a special guest. I may revisit Modern sometime. Modern's going to get a big old shakeup. Maybe it'll become fun again for me. Who knows? Alright. Can you play this with Siege Rhino and Bring Delight? I'll pay. I mean, I will torture myself for money. I'm game. Let's talk about that later. Alright. Sword of Truth and Justice, aka Sword of Phil is hyped as fuck, and everyone else on the internet thinks that this card is bad. Okay. Why am I excited about this card? It has protection from blue and white, and I've been wanting a protection from blue and white sword for years. That's the big starting point. So, against Miracles in particular, when you're a D&T deck and you're playing Sword of War and Peace and Sword of Fire and Ice, you're always torn on the protection side. You know, your Sword of War and Peace can go and protect from Swords to Plowshares and Path to Exile, but then it misses out on things like Jace Bounce and Snapcaster Mage block. If you're going and getting Sword of Fire and Ice, you're leaving yourself open to like Swords to Plowshares and Path to Exile. So there's always this tension here. This goes and makes it a non-choice. You can get this, and they get Terminus and Council's Judgment to answer it. And that's probably it. You know, there are other choices, you know. There's the occasional Unexpectedly Absent or like the Supreme Verdict or something. But this really cuts down on the number of answers that Miracles has to your creatures. Alright. While we're still talking about Miracles, this ability in the Miracles matchup reads, equip this sword to a creature. Play no other creatures to the board until your opponent answers this. And it's damn hard to answer. So, like, let's take the worst case scenario. Let's say you have a Mother of Runes. You equip this to a mom, you attack for 3. Then you attack for 5. Then you attack for 7. Oh, after your opponent fetches, that probably means that even a mom is like a 3-turn clock with this. Oh, that's terrifying. This is a sword where if they don't answer it, you're in trouble. Yeah, sure, but like if you have this equipped versus Miracles, like you're dealing combat damage. Like you are getting it there. Like they can't block it with Mentor tokens, they can't block it with Snapcaster or Vandalion Click. Like it's getting through if it's equipped and they don't have an answer to it. So like for the D&T versus versus Miracles matchup, even with your like worst bodies, this card is absurd. Nothing blocks it. You have to answer the sword or like Terminus away the creature. And if you Terminus away the creature, the sword's still there. And then even a derpy 1/1 like Recruiter of the Guard is terrifying. So like, let's completely ignore the proliferation aspect of it for right now, and like let's just focus on like the scaling of the ability. This is protection from the colors you want, while also making your creature huge. For non-Miracles matchups for D&T specifically, this is big game. Still. Like, this is a second pro-blue sword for the True Name Nemesis matchups, where you're really worried about the board getting stalled. This is a sword that still lets you push through in the mirror. Is the ability great in the mirror? No. But it's another fine card that you would probably bring in. So this is great against True Name decks. Hey, this is great against... Oh, hey, all those blue Planeswalkers that people have been playing, like, say, Teferi and Jace. This protects from their abilities. That's cool. If your opponent's playing a Gideon, like, ignore the Knight tokens. Whack them. The proliferation side is medium, so it's, like, best to just view this as, like, directly putting 2+1/+1 counters on a creature. The proliferation side is not going to matter that much. When it does matter, though, it will probably be, like, game-ending. So, like, if you get to proliferate your Jitte counters, or jump your Aether Vial up 1 more, or put another counter on a Walking Ballista, tick your opponent's Vial up to 4 so they can't Flicker Wisp and blow you out. Tick your opponent's Chalice off of 1 up to 2 so you can cast the Swords to Plowshares that's stuck in your hand. The proliferation in D&T specifically is not always going to be good, but when you proliferate something, it is going to be game-ending. Yeah. Muck with their Blast Zone, their Ratchet Bomb. Like, there's very real things that you can muck with on the other side of the battlefield. Engineered Explosives, great example. Okay. So, for non-D&T decks, the obvious place where this is going to be stupid is Steel Stompy. In Steel Stompy, you have a bunch of critters with +1/+1 counters in the first place. Like, you have Hangerback Walkers, Walking Ballistas, Steel Overseers, and things of that nature. So, like, this card has 2 colors of relevant protection, and the Proliferate is going to be stupid in the matchup, like, this card is going to be good in D&T sideboards from time to time. I think this is a, like, Steel Stompy sideboard staple. Like, I imagine you just, like, maybe always want to play one of these. So I think Sword of Truth and Justice is, like, twice as good as it looks on paper. I think in performance this card is going to be insane. I will have one of these in my D&T sideboards as soon as it is legal, and this is a card that has me hyped to play more D&T. And I've been kind of down on D&T recently. Mostly because it's a time-consuming deck and requires a lot of brain power, and I haven't had a lot of either of those recently. Do I think it replaces War and Peace? Yes. I do. I love Sword of War and Peace. It is my pet card. I just think this is better. It's not necessarily going to be a, like, you will never play War and Peace again, because War and Peace, like, has overlap that this card doesn't. So, for example, War and Peace would give you overlap for, like, the Mirror and Red Prison, for example, whereas this does not. So it's not going to be, like, never play War and Peace again, but this will be my 4th piece of equipment in the sideboard from now on by default, unless I have a reason to play something else. So I'm going to call out someone here. So Anurag was streaming when this card got spoiled, and someone was like, hey, the blue-white sword got spoiled. And he was like, oh god, oh shit, it's happening. You know, the D&T matchup is ruined forever. And Anurag saw this card and laughed because he thought it was so bad. So I am in the opposite camp. I think this card is great. And I'm really excited to play this card. I think it is much better than it looks. Alright. So now we are transitioning out of the good cards into the cards that I think are great. I think all the cards that follow here are absolutely amazing at doing what they do, and they will probably change decks. The first is a very, very, very narrow card, but very powerful. Hall of Heliod's Generosity. So, this is the Volrath Stronghold for enchantments. So, obviously, this slots in as an immediate one-of in Enchantress. The ability to go and get back some of your cards is stupid. Let's see, does Enchantress have some card that they might want to bring back every turn that might otherwise have some big downsides? Oh wait, Solitary Confinement! That was the card I was thinking of. This is a way to get back your Solitary Confinement after a turn or two if you find that you don't need it for a little while. And that's very, very powerful. Because there's some times where you might be able to go and support a lock for a few turns, but not indefinitely, depending on what your draws look like off of your like, pseudo cantrips. Oh, I'm getting to that. Enchantress also has a couple of artifacts, a couple of enchantments that sacrifice themselves, such as Sterling Grove. So you can, like, repeatedly recur a tutor / something that gives your enchantments Shroud, or you can recur the 2 destroy target artifact or enchantment enchantments. Seal of Cleansing and Seal of whatever the green one is that does the same thing. Yeah, so, like, this is really cool. Yeah, Dr. Bill, thank you. That's good. Dr. Bill plays Enchantress from time to time as well. Elephant Grass is something that you can, like, recur every turn, and it's, like, super, super annoying. Elephant Grass is something that, like, you can usually pay for a few turns, but, like, by the time that thing has 3 or 4 counters on it, it's kind of obnoxious. This is a big deal. And Dr. Bill is suggesting this as a 2-of, 1 in the sideboard, 1 in the main. Yeah, I can see wanting access to more copies of this card, especially for the Wasteland matchups where it might actually get destroyed. So I think this card is a big deal for Enchantress. If you are one of the 7 players out there who still plays Enchantress religiously, this is huge for you. So like spatula of the ages, you know. I'm sure you're happy there. Can this see play elsewhere? Yes, I think so. So like let's talk about lands one more time. Say you dredge a mana bond or an exploration. You could go and use this to go and put that card back on top of your library and then redraw it. I think lands is getting enough tools where they don't need a card that has a white cost in its activation, but that's an example of the sorts of things that you could do with this card. There might be more fairer ways to use this. So, for example, you may have an enchantment that is a powerful hate card that like you might want to have access to. All right, I'm going to do it. For the first time in the stream, I'm going to do it. So, for example, in Nick Fit, if you are playing one of the enchantment-heavy versions of it, you might have some stupid big enchantments that you want to recur because they get countered or whatever. And you also might have hate cards like Choke that this can go and get back. Yeah, if you were playing a red-white prison deck, you could do that. But I streamed red-white prison a few weeks ago, and it was a disaster, so I don't recommend playing that deck. And it's also kind of questionable to like play utility lands in your Blood Moon deck. So like, this is a great card, but it's narrow. This is going to see heavy play in Enchantress and maybe somewhere else. All right. Next up is a card that I am super excited for. I think this card is absolutely insane, although it fits in exactly one deck. So, Sling Gang Lieutenant. ETB, make 2 goblins. 3 bodies for 4 mana, looking good. Sacrifice a goblin. Target player loses 1 life and you gain 1 life. So, if you look very closely at the picture, you'll notice that there is a goblin in a slingshot. Not pictured is the fact that this goblin is like dosed in gasoline, because that's how good this card is. Alright, why is this card good? Goblins wins long games of Magic. End statement. That deck has so much inevitability with its like recruiter engine and the ringleaders and the Volrath stronghold. You outgrind most decks in the format. When do you lose? You lose in primarily 2 scenarios. You lose when your opponent can combo you out faster than you can get your stuff going, or you lose when your opponent reduces your life total to 0 before you can get your stuff going. What does this card do? Help you against both. Against a deck like Delver, this lets you stabilize. You can sack some of your crappy 1/1 goblins, and all of a sudden, you're surviving another Delver hit. And then you get 1 more turn to tick that vial up and get stupid stuff online, like Siege Gang Commander, for example. Although this card probably like replaces that, so like that's probably a bad example. And Wilson, thanks. So for anyone who's not like following me on Facebook or Twitter, I did finally accept a job offer. I'll be moving to North Carolina, about an hour outside of Charlotte, towards the end of the summer. Just quick aside to finish that thought, so I don't get a billion questions later. I will be working for Thomas Jefferson Classical Academy. I'll be teaching 5 sections of Latin 2 next year. It's a charter school where I'll be one of 2 Latin teachers, and I'm going to have like a ton of flexibility in what I teach and how I teach it. It's going to be a wonderful place to live. I'm looking at Shelby specifically as a place where I'm going to live. So Charlotte friends, I'll be close. I'll be showing up to your legacy events from time to time. All right, and decide on me. On my other more casual streams where I'm not like super focused on a topic, I'll chat more about the job and all that. But like, let's talk about goblins. So this card lets you stabilize versus Delver and other fast aggro decks, and it gives you reach versus combo. in the Magic Christmas Land world, where you pair this with, like, Pechaluk Mons, you don't need to sacrifice that many goblins to go and get your opponent dead. And otherwise, versus a deck like, say, Show and Tell, like, a lot of times you can get them to a middling life total, and then they combo off and kill you. Well, if you get them to a middling life total, they cast Show and Tell, you put this in, you sack out your board, they might die. So I think this is going to help you against combo and help you against Delver, which are two matchups that can be tough in some ways. And I think this is just an absolutely amazing card. I think the Black Splash already made sense in Goblins, and this card and Munitions Expert, which is the next card that I'm going to talk about, just like solidify Red-Black Goblins as the superior version of the deck. The Charlotte group loves their Dread of Knights. Well, Dr. Bill, it's bad for me, but I can borrow decks other than D&D from time to time. I'm good at playing with random Magic cards. I hope I've established that over the course of hundreds of streams. Yeah, so, like, Goblin Lackey brings up that, like, this also can beat some random cards that hose goblins, like Energy Field and Glacial Chasm, that, like, previously the deck had basically no answers to. Speaking of Red-Black Goblins, Munitions Expert. This is huge. I know that this card doesn't look impressive. I know the first time when you look at this card, you see this is a splash card that can be hard to cast that does the same thing as Gen Palm Incinerator. So why wouldn't I just want Gen Palm Incinerator? Dread Horde Arcanist. This card is better at killing the Arcanist than Gen Palm Incinerator is, because this goes and provides a body itself. And I know that it sounds stupid that I'm focusing so much around that card, but its 3 toughness is a huge deal, because things like Tarfire don't go and hit it. That doesn't beat it. And when you're on the draw in particular, answering that card in a timely fashion before it buries you in cards is really hard. This is a card that's much better at doing that. Ash Moses, Dreadhorde Arcanist is probably like top 3 cards from the set from War of the Spark, along with like Karn and Narset. Like, in my mind, it's like Karn's the best card from the set, followed by Dreadhorde, followed by Narset. Like, that should give you an estimation of how much I value that card. Like, we could get into an argument about, like, is Narset better than Arcanist? But like, that's not the point of the stream. Yeah, I went on the record very, very early saying how stupid I thought that card was. I'm very happy to have been right on that one. Yeah, people were kind of like denying it for a little while, and then it's like, Blue-Red Delver wins, Blue-Red Delver wins, Blue-Red Delver wins, and it's like, all right, fine, I get the memo. Anyway. So the single extra point of damage that this goes and provides is a big deal. Plus, like, this is Flash. Like, it's a Flash Goblin. That's really cool, and it gives you some flexibility. It can also, like, absolutely wreck some people mid-combat. So I'm really excited to play with this card. Also, this hits a Planeswalker, too. Planeswalker. Are there big Planeswalkers from the recent set which are super threatening and, like, maybe will try to win the game on the spot and you can just, like, hose them when they play their lattice? Yes, there are. Yes, there are. Get out of here, Liliana, last hope. Agreed. Okay, so now we're coming to, like, the best cards of the set. The ones in Category 6 here are the ones that are going to see widespread use. Like, these 3 cards here are awesome cards, but they basically only see play in one deck, right? Like, for Enchantress, 4 Goblins. The next cards are wider and will see play in a lot of places. Fuck this card. I'm so scared of this card. So scared. Alright. This is Engineered Plague on a creature. Now I know what you might be saying. Yeah, it's not a creature, so you can just kill it. At the same time, it's on a creature, so I can just recur it with my K command. Oh god, why? This is... Nah, thank you for that one. Nah said, this is going to be great in Carrier Tribal. And I lost it. Alright. So the thing that scares me the most about this card is that you can bring this card back. Like, you can play this, wipe the board of, say, humans, chump block with it, bring it back, name a different creature type, wipe the board with it again. This card terrifies me as a lover of X1 creatures. So, for example, like, let's say, like, you're playing against Grixis Control. They put it in the battlefield, name human, they wipe out your mom and your Thalia. Over the course of the game, they chump block with it, it dies, you have a Revoker on their Jace, they K-command, blow up some of your stuff, make you discard a card, put this in play, you know, eliminate your Revoker, still have a 2/2 Death Toucher in play. It's bad. For example, in Nick Fit, yeah, you can recur this card a lot of different ways. So one of the things that like also makes this really good is this fact that it has Death Touch. So it will wipe the board of something and then trade with something else. So this is like an X for one creature, where X varies wildly from deck to deck. Like, let's just like think of the Goblins matchup, for example. Like, put this in play, wipe the board of the smaller Goblins, trade with a bigger Goblin that is threatening to like attack you for a bunch, and then like recur it and wipe some more Goblins. Like, this card is terrifying. This is arguably, very arguably, the best sideboard card from the set. But like, the sideboard potential in this category is absolutely absurd. So I don't even know that this is true. But this is awesome for black control and mid-range decks as a sideboard card. I think this is going to get slotted into a lot of decks. I wouldn't even be surprised to see Delver play this, honestly. Like, it's a body, and a good one. Like, a 2/2 Death Toucher that wipes the field of a bunch of your opponent's creatures, like, that might be fine. But, like, definitely we'll see play in Grixis Control. Definitely we'll be seeing play in things like Esper Stoneblade, if that ever comes back. This card is great. And the art's really cool. I really like the art. I'm scared. Me too. Hold me, Purple Intet. We'll be alright together. Alright. Next up, we have the Oofy. Or however it's pronounced. No one truly knows. Except old Magic players. They probably know. Okay. So, this is No Rod on a creature. Oof. Oh, is it just like a single syllable? Like, oof, that hurts? Okay. Alright. So the Collector. It's No Rod on a creature. So this sort of like fits some of the same thing that's going on with Plague Engineer, in that like it's vulnerable to removal, but at the same time it can be recurred, and most importantly, Green Sun Zenith. You get to tutor this up. So this is an incredibly powerful and narrow card that you can effectively have 5 copies of with no deck building cost other than a 1 of sideboard slot. This is insane. For example, in Nick Fit, yeah, or Elves, or Maverick, like, this is going to go into a lot of decks. It will be a singleton. It will be very, very good. very, very good. You know, also provides some passive hate for the Karn decks that are going around, because if they have Karn and Mycosynth Lattice and you have this little like monkey friend slash fiend slash whatever an oof is, they're not gonna have a good time if they try to like lattice you out. I also think the surprise of this card is going to get a lot of people with their pants down. Green Sun for 2? Oh yeah, they're gonna go and get an Elvish Visionary. Your artifacts are off. Uh-oh, I can't respond with my Vial now. This is gonna do some really interesting and warping things to game. I also think this is a good example of when a powerful card is worth some self-damage. So, for example, you may see this in Maverick, where they might have some artifacts, but the damage that they can do with this card is so great at certain points in the game that it will be worth doing a little bit of self-damage to just ruin an opponent. This is going to see a lot of sideboard play. The Green Sun decks are the most obvious home, but honestly, in a green deck that doesn't use artifacts, this is just great. So say you're playing a Shardless Agent deck, this is an awesome thing to like go and cascade into. This will see widespread play. Probably never as more than a 1-of, but it'll be a real good 1-of. On the list of other cards, that makes me sad. This one's scary, because this ruins most of the decks that I like to play. So a lot of times when you're thinking about sideboard cards, the way that you want to evaluate a sideboard card is what percentage of the time where I draw this card do I win the matchup that I'm boarding this in for? And I think with Shenanigans, when you draw this card, the percentage of games that you're going to win is absurdly high. So if you're playing against Red Prison and you get to go destroy your Chalice, destroy your Trinisphere, destroy your Bridge, and just like guarantee that you draw Shatter every turn forever, it's hard to lose. If you're playing against D&T and you get to nug their Vial and their Sword and their Battlescroll and their more other Sword and their more other Vial forever, it's hard to lose those games. So I think this card is awesome. I think this will absolutely be a card in Delver. I think this is even a fine card in something like Grixis Control. And if you can use the dredge from it in some way, that's great too. So for example, in Rug Delver, where this goes and fuels your Tarmogoyf or your Nimble Mongoose or your Hooting Mandrills, that's a big deal. In Grixis Delver, you can use this to like help get Snapcaster targets into the, Grixis Control, not Grixis Delver. In Grixis Control, you can go and use this to get Snapcaster targets or Gurmag Angler food. Yeah. Puts cantrips and other bullshit in the graveyard for the Arcanist to ruin your life with. Yes, that's a great example as well. If you need artifact hate in lands, this is really good because you can dredge over it with Life from the Loam and then recur this. This, in my mind, is one of the best cards from the set, and it's a frickin' common. Like, let that sink in. In the context of Legacy specifically, this card is insane. Like, top 5 cards in the set, for sure. Which is saying, alright, like, top 5 cards in the set as long as you count Horizon Lands as 1. Because, you know, those are really good. This card makes me very leery about playing artifact-centric strategies. The Karn decks are very, very good. Bomberman, for example, is probably one of the best decks in Legacy right now. But this hurts those strategies a bit. Of note, though, it is a sorcery, and that is a downside. Like, that's very real when you compare it to other sideboard artifact hate cards. Alright. So, when Force of Negation first got spoiled, I think a lot of people were disappointed. At least Legacy players. And they were like, man, it's shitty Force of Will. Why would I possibly want this? Like, it's just not good. It has too many restrictions. And I saw something very different. This card is like a supplemental card to Force of Will. It's obviously not a replacement for it. And it's one that does very different things. It exiles the card. So some of the recursion cards, like Life from the Loam, get nugged by this. It is a card that is very easily hard castable. Force of Will is not. Think about a Delver deck. A Delver deck can get to 3 mana and hard cast this. That's totally reasonable to do. If you are playing this as combo hate, when do combo decks go off? Hold on. With the exception of Weird High Tide, it's their own turn. So you can go and just counter target non-creature spell in a combo deck, and like that's totally fine as a pitch ability. So, like, yes, there are going to be times where you can't use this the way that you want to, but a lot of the times when you get to the mid game, this is fine. So, like, where does this see play? I think this is a great card in Delver. Delver wants to protect cheap threats. Does Delver have a 2-mana red creature 1/3 that they'd really like to protect no matter what because it just wins the game if left unchecked? Wait, they do! This is an awesome card to pair with Dreadhorde Arcanist. And it's fine with any other threat that they're playing as well, but I think that's just like the best example of like protect the queen that like Delver wants to be doing right now. So like I think it's an easy slot in for Delver. I don't know the numbers, but I'd be perfectly fine with playing a couple of these in main or side. I think this is a fine card in Miracles, where you get a little bit more early protection, and you're totally fine with playing a slightly awkward negate that gives you like some other outs, like nug your Life from the Loam. I never have to deal with it again. Like that's cool. Yeah, the art upside is absolutely huge as well. Note that for some decks this isn't great. So like the pitch side of this is only if it's not your turn. So this is not something like a show and tell deck is going to use to defend itself. They'll stick to things like Flusterstorm and Spell Pierce for that. But if you are looking to stop what your opponent is doing, this is very powerful. So I think the Delver decks gain from this. I think some of the mid-range decks, like some of your Miracles and Stoneblade decks, will definitely try this out as well. I think this is going to see way more play than people expect. So I think when this card was first spoiled, the Legacy players kind of scoffed at it. But in all the grinder chats that I'm in, people are pretty impressed by this card, and there's brewing going on around this card. So expect to see a lot of this. All right, like let me wax poetic about Arcanist one more time. If you're playing Arcanist and you get to like keep playing all of these cantrips from the yard for free, it makes up for the fact that you're pitching some extra cards to protect it, and that's just totally great. All right, end aside. All right, note that like Force of Negation is the last card in my like great card widespread use. I think Force of Negation is very good. I think it's going to see a lot of play, but I don't think it's a format-changing card. I think there's only 3 cards that are like format-changing, and then they're the last 3 here. So let's talk about our glorious, glorious fetch land overlord, Prismatic Vista. Yes, I talked about Goblin Engineer already. I'm about 90% through this stream, so check it out in the VOD later. So I went through everything in order. So Goblin Engineer will be towards the beginning of the stream. So I just kind of like progressed down through these. So now we're over here. Oh yeah, so just to let you look at that, that's kind of what I said about it. All right, Prismatic Vista. This opens a lot of doors in terms of deck building design. For example, in Nick Fit, where you are playing a bunch of different types of basic lands, and sometimes your fetching situation is really awkward because you want to get a basic, but each one of your fetches can only get 2 of maybe the 3 or 4 colors that you're playing. This just gets all of them. And in a deck like Nick Fit, like you don't really want to go and fetch a non-basic a lot of times, unless you're getting like to the later game. So for a deck that's heavy on basics, this is just a better fetch land. So in Miracles, for example, this is so much better than Scalding Tarn. Miracles like basically never wants to fetch a non-basic, right? Like, when do you want to fetch a non-basic? When you have Scalding Tarn and you can't fetch white. That's it. I mean, yeah, there's other times, but that's the biggest time. Otherwise, like maybe you're land light and you need to like hope to use your land to ponder into a terminus next turn or something like that off a single land. Like there's worlds, but largely you just want to be fetching basics. So in a lot of decks like Miracles or Stoneblade, which are really basic heavy, this is just going to make their mana bases better and is going to make Wasteland worse against them. Like, Wasteland is bad against Miracles, except for when it wins you the game. Like, that's how Wasteland works in those matchups. Like, when you go and you Wasteland a critical land from Miracles, like, sometimes you just steal a game because they stumble. And the number of times where that's going to happen is going to drastically decrease. So for your basic heavy decks, this is largely an upgrade for their mana bases. And it's a big deal. Like, if you asked me what blue deck has the best mana base in Legacy, my answer would probably be Miracles. And we're going to make their mana better. That's huge. Like, we could get, like, super pedantic and say, well, actually, High Tide plays all islands, and so, like, your fetches don't matter what they are. Like, but, like, for a multicolor blue deck, like, Miracles is, like, the best mana base that you could be hoping for. So to make that mana base better and decrease the number of times you're just going to get delvered by someone with a Wasteland, that's really big. So this is a big boon to Miracles and other, like, back-to-basics decks. And Nick Fit. Good job, Nick Fit. Okay, what else does this do? This lets you fetch wastes. That is, that colorless producing land. Some decks like White Eldrazi have really struggled with making a mana base that works. I know it sounds stupid, but making white and colorless work together effectively in a deck is really hard with the current options that they have. So, like, for example, it's really hard to cast a white-white card consistently while also getting your colorless. This is something that opens up the door to you having basic wastes. So a deck that wants to play Thought-Knots here can be better at playing around Blood Moon, while also getting their secondary color, whatever that happens to be. So I think your, like, white Eldrazi and red Eldrazi decks are going to get significantly better by having access to this card. Now, like, there's still some tension there, right? Because, like, you still want to be playing your soul lands. How many soul lands can you afford? You know, how many Ancient Tomb activations can you afford while also playing fetches? Like, you've got things to think about in that regard. But opening up basic wastes to decks, I think, is a really big deal. So this card is going to smooth out a lot of mana bases. It's going to make some decks less susceptible to Wasteland, which will, like, kind of make Delver and D&T a little bit worse. So, like, this card is going to change the format. It looks really simple at first, you know. You might go like, oh, is that really all that much better than the other options? Yes, it is. It is going to make Legacy mana bases more solid. It's not 100% upside because like you lose the ability to fetch for things like Tundra and Volcanic Island by doing this. But this is a game changer. And I don't think I'm going to say too much more about it because like we'll be able to see this reflected in deck lists, like the first set of deck lists that we get after this is live. Like I very much expect to see like Legacy Challenge top 8 with Miracles with, you know, 3 or 4 Prismatic Vistas in them. Is this perhaps a way for Wizards to take pressure off of the reserve list? I mean, Loki, we could get tinfoil hats and speculate all we want. But I think this is more of a nod towards making basic lands better. Like, this is a fetch land that isn't better than fetches that are already there, that sort of rewards you for having basics in your deck and lets you play around, like, Blood Moon effects a little bit better. That's my guess. I also think this is something that appeals to, like, the 5-color casual player. It's like, say you're playing your EDH deck, or your Commander deck, as they call them now, like, and you want to play a 4 or 5 color deck, like, this is a fetch line for those that, like, can fetch you your basics. So I think this is a card with wide appeal. Alright. Super sweet Planeswalker time! Yes, that is the face that I was expecting that Lomer Boy made when he saw this card. This is the best card from the set, and I don't think it's close. And that's saying something because this set is insane. Like, if we just kind of, like, look at the cards in, like, these last couple of categories here, like, the power level is great. But this is, yeah, that's a good way to put it. This is the flagship card of the set. This is the pushed card in a set with high power level as a baseline. So, what does this do? It means that for a 2-mana investment once, you make every land drop for the rest of the game if you have fetch lands or a wasteland that you can keep reusing. That's a big deal. So let's say you're Rug on the play. Mongoose, go. Off a fetch. Red and 6, get my fetch. Go. Now, this card threatens to wasteland you or let them keep hitting their land drops, which will let them, like, brainstorm lands back into their deck and, like, have more gas. Or if it's not doing that, it picks off your Mom, your Baleful Strix, your Delver, your Pyromancer, your Thalia, your Flickerwisp, your Recruiter. You get the idea. This is a wasteland engine, a way to ensure that you're hitting land drops, a way to, like, put lands into your hand that you can brainstorm back. This card is really powerful. Ignoring the -7, these 2 abilities alone on a 2-mana investment is great. The -7, like, it does things. Like, they're things that can matter, but, like, you're really playing this for the plus and minus. This is not a Planeswalker that you're playing for the ultimate. Like, there are the magical Christmas land scenarios where, like, you get to go and, like, retrace some stupid things from your graveyard, but largely, this is just, like, plus minus, plus minus, plus minus sort of thing. So like let's talk about some specific scenarios. You're playing 4-color loam. You can plus this as a wasteland engine, which will win a lot of matchups. Like good luck Karn decks at beating wasteland lock that begins on turn 2. Like turn 1, literally almost any land, Mox Diamond, Ren and 6. Pass. Uh-oh. Like, Wasteland Lock is threatened beginning turn 2 if you have any mana acceleration for turn 1. Still in 4-color loam, you can use this to recur your utility lands outside of Wasteland. So you get infinite, say, Cabal Pits, for example. That's huge. Or, I'll cycle my Tranquil Thicket, I'll return it with Ren and 6. I'll cycle it again next turn, and you can just, like, turn that land into real cards. So Mox Diamond is often like considered a card with a downside, right? If you're using this to get Ren and 6, it's a card with no downside, right? Like Mox land, Ren and 6, get my land back. Like I haven't gone on card disadvantage to play this card. Continuing with the 4-color loam, like let's say that you've stabilized the board and you've ticked this up a lot and you actually get to the -7, then you get into like this weird territory where you get infinite abrupt decays or assassin's trophies or things of that nature. That's a good question. Which one is Ren and which one is 6? I don't know. I don't have the answer to lore questions. That's not what I'm here for. So, like, let's just look at some other things. Like, say you play this on, like, turn 1 and plus, it's already out of bolt range. My lore people in chat tell me that 6 is the tree folk. Thank you, Da Vinci and Cultist. Much appreciated. So, like, if you just, like, play this and plus this, it's out of bolt range. It's out of punishing fire range. And honestly, it's out of small creature attack range. Like, even a decent-sized creature on turn 1 isn't just going to be able to kill this. Is it out of munitions expert range? Probably. So, this is a card that I think slots in as maybe a 2 questionable 3 of in a loam deck. But I also think that this is a card that you can build a deck around. I think it is very possible that you can build like a Ren and 6, like Mox Diamond land-based deck that can like be its own deck. I also think that it fits well into Rug Delver. Jason, about Force of Negation, expect that as maybe like a 2 of in a lot of lists. This is a really powerful Planeswalker. Like this is not a card that like can fit 4-color loam as a 4 of, but I think this can spawn its own archetype. Like I think this card is that good. Like so many decks want a walker that can kill creatures while giving you other value. Can we call it Ren and Stimpy? I mean, isn't that what card alters are for? Yeah, this is a great example of power creep. You know, remember the first time we got a Planeswalker for 2 mana? I remember. So, by Legacy standards, many times this is like minus kill a creature plus kill a land. That's a big deal. That's a really big deal. If I were trying to spike a tournament in the post-Modern Horizon worlds, I would consider spending time brewing around this card. It's very powerful, it's very undercosted, and it does so many of the things that you need to be doing in Legacy. Killing small creatures, and either making land drops or destroying opposing lands. So in the world where you build a deck around this, like, you can be in, like, an Exploration, Mox Diamond, Renin 6 land destruction deck, and, like, supplement it with things like Tireless Tracker, Ramunap Excavator, things of that nature. This card is real. I'm really excited about this card. This is a 2-mana Excavator with repeatable Ballista effect. I mean, when you put it that way, I'd, like, die on the inside as a D&T player. Yes. So someone in chat said, like, Loverboy said, D&T took a huge hit in this set, right? Like, Renin 6 is great against D&T. Prismatic Vista is great against D&T. Shenanigans is great against D&T. This is great. This is great. This is good. Like, the best cards from this set are all good against D&T, and the only thing that D&T got is a sideboard card. So, yes, D&T took a hit from this set. I mean, I'm still excited to play this card. But I'm gonna probably be playing a lot of Phyrexian Revokers. Alright. We have a set of cards to talk about now as kind of the last thing here. Canopy lands. Yeah, that's what I meant. The stream's going long. Alright. So the Canopy lands. These cards are great. These cards are very, very, very powerful. So Horizon Canopy is like what we currently have access to, and like there's a couple of different things that you can think about. Number one, something that's in Horizon Canopy colors now can have multiple lands of this sort. So, for example, if you are in white, you can have 1, 2 plus Horizon Canopy. You can have 3 sets of these lands that, like, you can pay life for and then get a card out of them later. So there are going to be potentially new archetypes spawned from the fact that you can play a lot of these that cycle themselves. I want to talk about nurturing peatland in particular. I think you can build turbo depths in a very different way now. I think you can build turbo depths maybe without duels or with few duels and with this instead. Because turbo depths is something that wants to win the game as quickly as possible. So does the life loss matter? No, absolutely not. Does it really need, like, Bayou specifically? No. You probably still want some fetches so that you can get basics for, like, Blood Moon reasons. But, like, you don't really need Bayou all that much. So this is something that can let you go and refuel in the mid-game. Consider also a deck like Burn. If you are willing to forego Fire Blast, you can build a Burn deck that has 8 lands that can cycle if you are starting to flood out. Consider a deck like Blue-Red Delver. Would they be willing to play something that can go and play out their initial threats and then cycle away? It doesn't work with Daze. Is that okay? Would it be okay to play this as a one-of to supplement your primary game plan to hedge out against flooding, which a Delver deck really doesn't do well when it floods, and it hopes to brainstorm back its lands in the late game? Is this something that you would go and slot into these shells? So these may be good enough to change the way that some legacy mana bases are built for, like, top tier or close to top tier decks. Depths in particular is obvious. I think Burn is pretty obvious. And there's other places as well. going back to our graveyard-centric decks, in a Life from the Loam deck, would you want to play one of these? Is one of these going to be better than what you had access to before? In lands previously, like we saw Horizon Canopy seeing play in that deck sometimes, would they maybe want one of these instead in some situations? Yeah, Humans is another great example, where Humans is running Horizon Canopy. Would they maybe prefer one of these other lands, depending on how their mana base, what their creature base looks like? Humans oftentimes has Noble Hierarchs in there as mana acceleration, so Horizon Canopy happens to work well. But what if you're on a black heavy build and you have Kite Sail Freebooters and Bobs? All of a sudden, is Silent Clearing starting to look good? Well, that's a great question. What about some of the other creature heavy decks that also need a high land count? The Aethervile decks come to mind. Would you want some of these in Merfolk? Well, if you're playing Chalice Merfolk rather than Daze Merfolk, that looks like a pretty good land. Sure. What about something like Soldier Stompy? There you might be willing to play something like this. I think my Soldier Stompy list had a Horizon Canopy or two in them in the first place. You're getting a lot of flexibility in how you can choose to build your mana bases. Are these fast enough for Death Shadow? So we don't have a blue-black one here. If we had a blue-black one, I think that would be quite good. Yes, I am definitely going to SCG-Con. It's literally 10 minutes from my house. I'll probably go for a little while on Saturday. I will be there, I'll probably be there for a little while Friday. I will be there for all of Saturday for the main event, probably. And, oh yeah, no worry. And then I'm not sure if I'm going to show up Sunday. I just accepted a job, and I'm going to be moving at the end of July. So, I need to start doing some stuff. But, I've got plans for Saturday. I'm going to, play an unhealthy amount of Magic and then, get some drinks with friends and relax, and that'll be nice. So I just have to decide, how much of my Friday and Sunday can I afford to spend as well. How many of these do you think Knight of the Reliquary decks play? Well, I just look at, current Knight decks and see how many they're, Horizon Canopies they're playing now, and that's probably about the right number. So, between 0 and 2 is probably about right for a Knight of the Reliquary deck. So the other thing that this can do is open up some weird color combinations. So your Mardu deck that has Young Pyromancer and Bob and a bunch of just value cards. A lot of times those sorts of decks flooded out in the mid to late game and they couldn't really do anything. Now you can run Silent Clearing and or Sunbaked Canyon and try to make a go off that mana in the early game while using it to cash in later on. So this can open deck building doors. So notably, if you're playing these over, say, a fetch, you lose access to your basic lands. And so, you become more vulnerable to, Wasteland and Blood Moons and whatnot, and you lose some ability to play with cards like Daze that require you to have certain basic lands. But you get a lot out of these. So, Nurturing Peatland, I think, is the best of these by a lot. But I expect all of these cards to see play. And I think people will pause just a little bit longer when they go and construct their mana bases from now on. Say you're building red-white D&T or black-white D&T. These cards are, easy slot-ins into the shell. Yeah, so, if I were to rank these, it's, 1, 2, and then there's a big gap between them for the rest. So, this is great for Turbo Depths. This is, probably the best color combination otherwise, and then like the rest of these are fine. All right, so here is the list in all of its glory. I ended up talking for about 2.5 hours on this. I was shooting for under 2, but you know, it didn't happen. And let me say, that was 2.5 hours just talking about these ones. I ignored a lot of things that are fringe playable from this set. So like there's others that like I left off this list. You know, there's the green 1 mana mini Progenitus thing. There's the weird construct guy that can sacrifice himself to tutor a construct or something. Like, there's more cards than what made this list here. What I'll say to you is that if you're interested in more viewpoints, I recommend Maxtortion's article. It's on MinMax blog. He has viewpoints that are similar to my own for most of these cards, but we differ on a few key points. And he also goes into detail about a few of them that I skipped over. You know, there's also a white beast with him that he discussed in the article there that I skipped over. So that's the first place that I would recommend checking out. I am really excited for this period of Legacy. You know, even though D&T probably takes a little bit of a hit here, there's so many new and awesome cards to go and try out, and I'm really looking forward to it. On that note, self-promotion here. I do donation deck lists for all sorts of streams. Like, I'm a D&T player at heart, but I stream with everything. And if you're excited to see some of the cards from this set, like, my donation details are below the stream, and I would love to be playing with some of these new cards. I'm a teacher, and I'm off for the summer, so I'm going to be streaming a lot of Legacy. All right, and shameless self-promotion and Phil trying to make money while he's not working over the summer. All right. So, as a whole, so final closing notes here. The cards here are the ones that are going to make the highest impact on Legacy, but there's a lot of things that are going to see some degree of play from this set. I don't think things are settled from War of the Spark yet. I still think that people are figuring out the format. You know, we're still figuring out how to best fight against Karn. We're still figuring out, like, what the best shell for Arcanist is. Like, is it Blue-Red Delver? Is it Grixis Delver? People really disagree on that still. So I don't think we've reached a point of Legacy stability yet, and we're about to inject, like, I talked about 29 cards, but, like, there's a bunch of these as well. Like, we're about to inject a ton of new powerful cards into the format, and, like, again, we're going to see another period of exploration, and this is going to be, like, a really, really cool time. Like, I've been reading Reddit comments and forum posts where people are like, yeah, yeah, that's a great example. I'm testing out Hogoak, or however we say that, in Dredge, and it's really cool. You know, you can legend rule it to itself to go in and like make a bunch of zombie tokens. Like, it does some real cool things. It's different than Dread Return, but it's neat. And I've seen people like saying like, oh, I'm going and like I'm trying to brew a Seasoned Pyromancer deck, or like, oh, I'm trying to play a Baleful Strix Icefang Coatl deck, you know, so I have all these Death Touchers. Or like, you can go real deep with this set and go like, hey, I'm gonna revisit Zombardment, and I'm gonna see if like Cabal Therapist plus Cabal Therapy plus all my recursive zombies like can make something work. Like, this is a Brewer's Paradise set. If you're interested in trying to make something work with fringe cards, this is a good time for you. Yeah, full art Snowlands, big deal. All right, I think my voice is about shot for tonight, so I'm gonna go ahead and call it. If you enjoyed tonight, please consider following my channel or subscribing or donating to do something to support me. I hope you enjoyed again. I'll be back tomorrow morning for some Omniscience action, and I'm going to turn you over to Negator, who is, I assume, playing some deaths. Haps, thank you very much for the bits. That is a great way to end the stream. Cheers to you. Let's host Tom.